Ag the of Augustá Fáilteóh is mis an scéileh. Hello, and you're very welcome. I'm the little storyteller, and this is Patreon Insider. Um, I've been on Patreon for quite a while now, and every month I write a new story inspired by my deity on Dagda, the god of the Tuatha Dan, god of druidry amongst the Tuatha Danann. Um, and then mid months I do an audio recording of those stories, to kind of just bring some content to people and help inspire. Um, Through this process, it has really been rather life changing for me. And the story that I wrote, which I've just done an audio recording for, is called "The Greatest of Emotions." Um, this story is based on a segment from the Second Battle of Moytura, the Cath Moytura, and it talks about. It's kind of in the aftermath of the battle. Okay, so if you aren't aware, the second Battle of Moytura is based where the two of the Danann have been in rulership of Ireland, and they face an invasion of their ancient foes and their ancestral foes in many ways, the Fomorians. Um, the deposed King Bress goes to his Fomorian ancestry and kind of convinces them to invade Ireland, and during that entire process, there's a lot of conflict. It's one of the Ireland's big sagas that appears in many of our like historic kind of texts. But there's a segment in there, it's towards the end of it. There's almost like this two scenes that end out the whole tract of the Second Battle of Moytura. The end scene being the more famous, the Morrigan's poetry. So the Morrigan is the goddess of kind of battle, poetry, and prophecy. So the Cath Moytura, the Battle of Moytura ends with this poetic performance, and it's very kind of real and visceral because it's not actually over until the poetry is performed, until the deed is recognized and recorded, and the Morrigan in her role of that steps in to do that. But then her performance goes beyond just the recording of what is and what she sees all around her. It goes into her prophecies for the future of Ireland. But in the beat just before that, the scene just before that, almost like there's a mirror of the two performances of these two great gods amongst the two of the Danann. It's the Dagda. So the Dagda's own home gets raided during the Battle of Moytura, and his harper Utne is actually taken away with his harp, Dor Blah. And so at the end of this tract, the Dagda goes to recover his own property and to face down the Fomorians who raided him. But how it's actually resolved is a very, very inspirational section of the story. And I'd like to maybe read that for you here because this is what really inspires the audio that I have recorded for you today. So I have a translation of Ancath Banktura for me here, but it's the Whitley Stokes translation. And in this section it says, "Now Lugh and the Dagda and Olma pursued the Fomorians, for they had carried off the Dagda's harper, who was named Utne. They then reached the banqueting house, in which were Bress, son of Olatha, Alathan, son of Delbath. They hung the harp on the wall, that is the harp in which the Dagda had bound the melodies, so that they sounded not until by his call be summoned them forth. When he said this below, Come, Dordoblaw, come, Kercahar come summer, come winter, mouths of harps and bags and pipes. Now that harp had two names, even Dor Blah, which is the oak of two greens or meadows, and Ker Cahar Cor, which is the four-angled music. Then the harp went forth from the wall, and killed 9 men, and came to the Dagda. And he played for them then the three things whereby a harper is distinguished, to wit, sleep strain, smile strain, and wail strain. He played the wail strain to them, so that their fearful women wept, tearful women wept. He played the smile strain to them, so their women and children laughed. He played sleep strain to them, and all of the hosts fell asleep. Through that sleep, the three of them escaped, unhurt from the Fomorians, though they desired to slay them. So that's the section really that I'd like to talk about, and that inspires this story, The Greatest of Emotions, because we're dealing with the three great strains of music that occur in the Irish kind of lore. It's the Galtre, the Gyantre, and the Soontre, which is the wailing strain, the joyful strainer, and then the sleeping strain. And these strains are also performed by Lou when he comes to Tara to kind of earn his position or to prove his kind of abilities in the court of the then King Nuada. And it is said that, like, right there, that the harper has to be like distinguished. You have to be able to perform these three musical strains, and the purpose of them is to help people express emotion. And that's really something that inspires me in regards and has helped actually change me as a man who grew up in the 1980s, well, was born in the 1980s in Ireland and then grew up through that culture of the time and how we have come. The idea of emotional intelligence is something that has really become more prevalent only in the last decade or so. The awareness of emotional support and how that needs to be prioritized in so many ways, because emotional health is as important as physical health and mental well-being and mental health. So this idea that there was these forms of music, these particular strains that would help people or would kind of move a person to emotional release, you know, their joy, helping them feel it so that they just revel. There's just, if you've been to a concert or you've been in your home in the privacy of your own space and your favorite tune comes on the radio, you kind of know what I'm talking about. It's not kind of welling up that energy, and you just, the head taps or the foot taps, the head nods, and when no one's looking, you take a bit of a dance around the kitchen. Um, but then there's those other songs that hit you right in the feels. There's straight away they take you to a memory, they take you to an experience, they take you to a time in your life where things weren't as joyful. The things are kind of hurt for you, or your woe kind of comes out, and the tears just flow. Um, and then there's those other songs, that other forms of music, which just brings you relaxation. It brings you peace. It brings you to a place where, you know, the cares of the day go away, the cares of the past go away, the cares of the future go away, and you're just in the moment with the music, and you can just decompress and relax. You today may have experienced this type of music. These three strains, they still exist all around us. You know, artists out there making music are aware of how music ties to our deeper emotions. It's aware of how the human condition is shifted and soothed and raised and elevated or kind of grieved, all through this art of music, all through this art of resonance and sound. And it's very, very powerful. So the segment that I've just read out for you is the Dagda performing this very powerful act to his enemies. Like, this is like, Bress is there in the hall, the fallen king of the Tuatha Danann, who brought the invasion with his dad, Alotha. You know, they're surrounded by their war host. It actually goes to conflict. Dagda gets charged by a nine, which is a collective or a group of warriors, but it doesn't turn to bloodshed. Like, it actually, he performs this emotional release. He performs this act, this energy shift for his foes, for those who have done harm on not just his own people, not just the land and the landscape, on his ancestors, but then personally on him by stealing from him his property. Like, there's a personal thing here. Like, we all know what it is like to put your own stuff aside for a higher ideal. But that gets very hard to do when you're personally damaged or personally hurt by something that has happened. So the idea that he could put all of that aside and still perform this emotional release for his foes, still perform this act in order to bring them through their grief, bring them through their joy, and then take them to the place of rest, take them to the place of Suntre, of sleep. You know, now it's not just a magical sleep where you're just like, yeah, you fall asleep, see you later, whatever. You know, for me, in my reading of this, it is that change, it is that resonance that comes through. It's that kind of vibration or altering the vibrations of energy that exist around us and within us. If you stood right next to a subwoofer when it's kicking off or the beat drops, you have felt the impact of that in your diaphragm. You know what it's like to be hit by a wall of sound in some ways. Um, he performs that for foes, you know, and it's not the case that he, Lou, the new king of Ireland and very dangerous person, Alma, the champion of the Tuatha Danann and the physically strongest one of all of them, they don't just put them to sleep and then shank them all in their sleep and be done with it. They actually just leave them. Even though, and it says it right there, even though the Fomorians desired to slay them, the Fomorians wanted to kill them, but they didn't kill them back. They didn't kind of go out there and they had them at the advantage. So that whole segment of the Casmark tour is really very interesting. And as I said, it forms the last two beats. You know, it's the Dagda performs this act to an act of offering and kind of helping people beyond emotions, even though they're the bad guy, the enemy, you know. And then we get the final beat where the Morrigan has to perform, like, has to acknowledge what has happened, has to see and say, you know, these are the people that fell. These are the people that like succeeded. This is what happened here, because it's not over until it is recognized, until it is acknowledged by a bard, by a poet, to actually say, this is the truth of it and this is how it is set down, because that is the information that then carries forward into the future so that people can remember. And as I've said in other kind of instances like this and other kind of elsewhere on my YouTube, for me, in the Irish tradition, the bard forms that link to memory. The bard is the person who is representational of memory in a society, in a culture. You know, you have to have the story about, you know, this time when this happened and a Brehon made this decision. You know, or you have to have the story about this time this hero went over and above, or you have to have the story about, you know, this time where someone kind of fucked with people he shouldn't have, you know, or damaged his reputation by not giving good hospitality to a bard or a poet. All of this then forms the memory, which then informs the next generation, informs the culture right the way down. So at the end of the Castle Mature, you have the Morrigan creating the truth of what's in front of her and then specifying out what this memory is going to be. So it comes down to people like me today. So I'm very passionate about this topic, as you can guess. Um, the idea of emotional health and mental well-being is something very important. I'm a neurodivergent person myself, and I work really, really hard to try and find a balance and find a healthy balance where I'm not suppressing emotion, where I am feeling my feelings, but in a healthy way, owning that kind of transition as I move through times of woe, times of joy, and then finding my times of rest. So thank you very much for joining me there for this Patreon Insider today. It is patreon.com/Dagda if you're interested in any of my stories and the audios, as I said. So new story every month, new audio every mid-month. And thank you very much for supporting me able to do this. Gaurav Mahagas, thank you very, very much. I'm going to stop saying thank you because it's getting awkward. I'm just going to say goodbye, which Oscuelga in Irish is Slán.